People assume things about you when your hands are rough and your shoes are old. They assume you don't notice the way conversations change when you enter the room. They assume you don't hear the pauses, the polite smiles, the words spoken just softly enough to pretend they weren't meant for you. And sometimes, they assume you don't understand the language being used to dismiss you. They were wrong about me. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I learned that on a winter evening, standing in a dining room that smelled like expensive wine and fresh lilies, holding my breath while my daughter's future in-laws laughed quietly at something they thought I could never understand. When my son-in-law lifted the object I had wrapped so carefully and murmured to his mother in Italian, "Orrendo," I understood every word. I smiled anyway. I nodded the way I have nodded my whole life, the way a man nods when he has learned that patience is not weakness and silence can be sharper than shouting. But let me start earlier, before that moment, before the laughter, before the mistake they made thinking I was small. My name is Anton Novak. Most people here call me Anthony now. It is easier for them, softer on the tongue. But my daughter Sophia still calls me Papa when we are alone, and that is the name that matters. I am 68 years old. For 41 years, I worked as a facilities supervisor at Mercy Union Medical Center in Cleveland. I fixed elevators that stalled between floors, patched pipes that burst in February freezes, replaced ceiling tiles after leaks no one noticed until they fell. I kept the hospital breathing quietly in the background while surgeons took credit for saving lives in the spotlight. It was honest work, invisible work, the kind of work you only notice when it stops. It was the work that paid for Sophia's textbooks after her mother died. The work that kept food on our table when grief made everything else heavy. The work that bought the narrow brick house on Fulton Street where my daughter learned to walk, to read, to forgive the world. Sophia grew into someone better than me. She became a pediatric oncologist. Smart, gentle, fierce in the way only people who have seen too much pain can be. She met Daniel Whitmore at the hospital. He was a surgical fellow then, polished already, confident in the way men are when the world has always moved aside for them. Daniel came from a family that treated achievement like inheritance. His father was chief of cardiothoracic surgery at a private clinic across town. His mother chaired charity boards whose names were engraved on walls. When I met Daniel the first time, he shook my hand quickly, already looking past me. The second time, his grip lingered a fraction longer, like he was trying to decide whether I was worth remembering. But Sophia loved him, and when you are a father, love makes you generous with your hope. The engagement dinner was held at his parents' home in Shaker Heights. Calling it a house felt dishonest. It had columns, a circular drive, windows that reflected money instead of light. I drove there my old sedan, the engine rattling in protest, my gift on the passenger seat beside me. I had wrapped it myself in brown paper and twine, the way my mother taught me when something mattered. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, conversations that floated above the ground, unbothered by gravity. Sophia found me near the doorway. "Papa," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "I'm so glad you came. I would walk through fire for you," I told her, and I meant it. That was when Daniel's mother noticed the package. "Oh," she said, lips tight with polite interest. "You brought something." "From my family," I said. "Something old, for something new." Sophia's eyes softened. She knew what it was. Daniel took it from my hands, unwrapping it carefully, already distracted. And then came the words in Italian. The laughter barely concealed. The assumption. They thought I would never know. They thought I was just a maintenance man with an accent that never fully disappeared. They were wrong. I smiled at the table. I smiled because I had learned, long ago, that people reveal everything when they believe they are safe to be unkind. And that night, they revealed far more than they knew. Daniel turned the object over in his hands the way people do when they're trying to decide whether something has value, not meaning. "It's old," he said finally, polite enough to pass, careless enough to sting. "Older than it looks," I replied. I did not say more. I rarely do. The piece was framed in dark walnut, worn smooth at the edges by decades of careful handling. Inside was a hand-carved wooden panel, no larger than a serving tray, etched with a scene of a hillside village beneath a storm-heavy sky. Small homes clung together, as if for warmth. A narrow road cut through the center, leading toward a chapel at the crest. The carving was intricate, deliberate, made by hands that understood patience. In the lower corner, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look, was a signature burned lightly into the wood. L. Novak. My grandfather. Daniel's mother leaned forward, squinting. It's rustic, she said, choosing the word the way one chooses a substitute when honesty feels impolite. Yes, I agreed. It survived war. That earned a polite nod, the kind reserved for stories no one intends to hear in full. Sophia reached out and touched the frame. Her fingers traced the grooves the way they always had. She had grown up with this piece hanging in our living room, just above the radiator that never quite worked right. As a child, she would sit on the floor and ask me questions about the village, about the road, about why the houses leaned toward each other. I told her it was because people lean together when the world pushes back. Daniel cleared his throat. We'll find a place for it, he said. Maybe my office. His mother smiled. Yes, somewhere appropriate. I nodded. I had nodded in rooms like this before. After Sophia's mother died, I cleaned offices downtown at night to keep us afloat. I learned quickly that wealth speaks softly when it thinks no one important is listening. During my breaks, I spent hours in the public library. I read newspapers, history books, old novels. I learned English properly, then German, then Italian. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I promised myself I would never again be lost in a room full of words. People speak differently when they believe language protects them. The rest of the evening passed slowly. Guests asked what I did. When I told them, conversations shortened. Someone always needed another drink, another introduction, another excuse. Sophia moved between worlds with the careful grace of someone who loved both and fully belonged to neither. When the evening finally wound down, she hugged me tightly near the door. Thank you for the gift, Papa, she whispered. It means everything. I know, I said. Just remember what it carries. She nodded, though I could see questions in her eyes. Driving home that night, through quiet streets dusted with snow, I thought about my grandfather carving that panel by candlelight in a village that no longer existed. I thought about my father carrying it wrapped in blankets when borders shifted and names became dangerous. I thought about how many times it had been nearly lost, nearly traded, nearly abandoned for something easier. And now it sat in a house where no one understood why it mattered. But that was not new. The wedding came the following spring. Sophia looked radiant. Daniel looked accomplished. Their vows echoed beneath stained glass while my memories filled the spaces between words. When I danced with my daughter at the reception, her cheek pressed against my shoulder, I felt something settle in my chest, pride braided with worry. You raised me well, she said softly. I raised you honest, I replied. The rest you did yourself. I saw the wooden panel once more, months later, hanging in Daniel's home office between framed degrees and awards. It looked smaller there, quieter, like it was holding its breath. He likes it, Sophia said, though uncertainty softened her voice. I'm glad, I said. I did not tell her what I had heard that night. Some truths wait for the right season. Years passed. Success changed Daniel. Or perhaps it simply revealed him. Long hours, sharp words, conversations that always circled back to money, appearances, efficiency. Sophia called more often, late, tired. He doesn't mean it, she would say. He's just under pressure. Pressure does not create cruelty, I told her gently. It only removes the mask. Then one November morning, while I was fixing a neighbor's heater, my phone rang. Papa, she said, and I knew before she finished the word. Sophia did not cry when she told me. That frightened me more than tears would have. I found the messages, she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of emotion, like a room after a fire. He didn't even deny it. He said it was meaningless. A release. He said I should understand. I turned off the heater and sat down on the basement steps. My knees felt suddenly old. Where are you? I asked. At the house, she said. Packing what I can. He's staying with his parents. Papa, I need to come home. Just for a while. You never left, I told her. Cool me. She arrived that afternoon with 2 suitcases and eyes that looked older than mine. We did not talk much that first day. I made lentil soup the way her mother used to when illness stole appetite, but not comfort. Sophia ate quietly at the kitchen table beneath the window where the wooden panel once hung. That night, I heard her crying through the wall. I did not knock. Some grief needs privacy before it can accept hands. The weeks that followed were filled with paperwork and words meant to wound politely. Lawyers spoke about assets the way doctors speak about organs, detached and transactional. Daniel contested everything. The house, the accounts, even the furniture. He says the carving belongs to the marriage, Sophia told me one evening, staring into her tea. He laughed when I asked for it back. Said it was ugly anyway. I closed my eyes. He called it what? I asked softly. Ugly, she repeated. Said I could keep the china if it mattered so much. But not that. She looked up at me then. Papa, I know it's not worth anything, but it's ours. It's Nano's. It's history. I reached for her hand. What if I told you, I said slowly, that its worth was never measured the way he thinks? She frowned. What do you mean? After her mother died, I sorted through papers I had avoided for years. In an old envelope, folded carefully, was an appraisal my father had commissioned decades earlier. He never spoke of it. He believed some knowledge invited danger. I retrieved it now from the drawer where it had waited patiently. Sophia read the yellowed page once. Then again. Papa, she whispered, this says. I know, I said, and it is worth more now. Her hands trembled, not with greed, with disbelief. We sat quietly. The next day, her attorney revised the proposal. Sophia would relinquish claims to the investment accounts. Daniel could keep the car, the artwork, most of the furniture. But she wanted 3 things. Her grandmother's china, her mother's jewelry, and the wooden panel. Daniel agreed immediately. It returned home on a gray Thursday, wrapped hastily, carelessly. Sophia hung it back where it belonged. The room felt warmer. Should we have it reappraised? She asked. Yes, I said. But first, I need to speak to someone. Daniel answered my call with surprise. We met at his new apartment overlooking the lake. Glass everywhere. Nothing personal. He offered me water. I declined. I wanted to thank you, I said, for being reasonable. He shrugged. Honestly, I don't get the attachment. It always looked cheap. I nodded. And when you said that at dinner, I continued. In Italian, you assumed I could not understand. His face changed. You should know, I said calmly, placing the new appraisal on the table, that some things increase in value quietly. Like patience, like craftsmanship, like people. He read. His hand shook. The number sat between us like truth. Daniel did not speak for a long moment. He stared at the appraisal as if it were written in a language he had not yet learned to read. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The glass walls of the apartment reflected his expression back at him from every angle, multiplying the shock. This isn't possible, he said finally. That thing was carved by my grandfather, I finished, in the foothills of what used to be southern Austria-Hungary, before borders learned how to move faster than people. He picked up the paper again, scanning the words, the seal, the signature of the expert whose name he recognized immediately. This says it's worth over $600,000, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. At auction, possibly more. That can't be right. It was hanging over a radiator. So were we, I said. For decades. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since I'd known him. Not as Sophia's father, not as a maintenance man, but as something he had failed to calculate. You knew, he said. It was not a question. I suspected, I corrected. I confirmed it when you decided it was worthless. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I made a mistake, he said. With Sophia. With everything. Yes, I agreed. You did. He waited, perhaps expecting comfort. Or forgiveness. Neither came. You traded it away for furniture, I continued. You dismissed it because you did not recognize its value. You laughed because you thought the language protected you. His jaw tightened. Why didn't you say anything that night? I stood, straightening my coat. Because people deserve the dignity of revealing themselves, I said, and because my daughter needed to see who you were without my interference. Silence filled the apartment. I loved her, he said weakly. Love, I replied, is how you speak when you believe no one is listening. I left him there, surrounded by glass and regret. When I returned home, Sophia was in the kitchen, stirring soup. She looked up. He knows, I said. She nodded once. No smile. No satisfaction. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a check made out to Sophia, meant to balance what he had taken. There was also a note. Short, apologetic, late. She showed it to me. Should I accept it? She asked. That is your choice, I said. But do not confuse money with understanding. She kept half, donated the rest to a children's clinic Daniel once dismissed as inefficient. The wooden panel remained on the wall. Months later, a museum in Vienna reached out, then another in Prague, then finally the National Gallery in Ljubljana requesting acquisition. Sophia and I discussed it over tea. It belongs somewhere it can be seen, she said. Yes, I agreed, but its story belongs to us. We sold it. The panel will hang in a gallery devoted to displaced artisans, its plaque describing the hands that carved it, the family that protected it, and the journey it survived. Sophia bought a small townhouse not far from me. She walks to work now. She laughs again. As for me, I funded a vocational scholarship at the hospital for people who work behind the walls, who keep places alive quietly. The wall where the carving once hung holds only light now, and somehow it feels full. The house is quieter now, not empty, just settled, the way a body feels after a long illness finally releases its grip. The kind of quiet that does not demand attention, does not ache for noise, but exists because it has earned a right to. In the evenings, when the light fades through the kitchen window and softens into that muted amber that only comes after a long day, I sometimes find myself standing in the living room without intending to. My feet stop there on their own, as if memory still guides them. The street outside hums gently, tires brushing asphalt, a distant siren that never quite reaches us, the occasional burst of laughter from someone passing by who has not yet learned how quickly joy moves on. I stand facing the wall where the wooden panel once hung. The space is not bare. It carries its own presence now. There is a faint outline still, a shadow of difference where years of weight and air and touch altered the paint. A slightly warmer tone where sunlight never quite reached. Some people would rush to cover it. Fresh paint. A photograph, a shelf, something to erase the reminder. I did not, because erasure is not the same as healing. That outline tells the truth. It says something meaningful lived here. Something stayed long enough to leave a mark. Not everything that matters is meant to disappear cleanly. I have learned to appreciate that kind of honesty. Sophia visits often. Sometimes she calls first. Sometimes she doesn't. She brings takeout in brown paper bags that steam when opened, or soup in mismatched containers, or sometimes nothing at all. Just herself, tired eyes and loose shoulders, and the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs permission to exist. She sits at the same kitchen table where she once studied late into the night, textbooks stacked too high, notes taped to the wall, exhaustion fighting ambition until one finally learned how to coexist with the other. It is the table where grief and hope learn to share space without demanding dominance. We talk about small things now, not because there's nothing left to say, but because the big things no longer need to be defended. She tells me about her patients. The woman who refuses pain medication because she wants to feel everything. The boy who pretends bravery but reaches for her hand when he thinks no one is looking. The older man who reminds her of someone she loved and lost, and how she stays a moment longer with him even when her shift is over. I tell her about my neighbors, about Mrs. Alvarez finally fixing the fence she complained about for 10 years, about the young couple upstairs who fight loudly and make up louder, about which tree on Fulton Street is finally dying and which one refuses to give up, pushing green through cracked pavement as if stubbornness alone could keep it alive. We compare notes. We laugh quietly. We let silence stretch without filling it. Sometimes she asked me questions she asked as a child. Questions that circle back because they were never really about answers. Do you think Nano would be proud? Do you think Mama would understand? She does not ask these questions with desperation anymore. There is no trembling beneath them. They are asked the way one checks a compass. Not because one is lost, but because direction still matters. I tell her the truth. They already knew. She breathes easier when I say that, as if confirmation frees something she did not realize she was still holding. The museum sent photographs last month. A thick envelope, heavy paper, careful presentation, the kind of package that announces importance before it is opened. I sat at the table longer than necessary before breaking the seal, as if ceremony might add meaning to something already complete. The panel hangs beneath soft lighting now, protected by glass. The grooves cast shadows exactly the way my grandfather intended. Shallow at first glance, deeper the longer you look. Wood is honest that way. It rewards attention, but does not beg for it. Beneath it, a plaque tells its story. Not the price, not the auction result, not the number people always lean toward first. It tells a journey, carved in exile, carried through borders, preserved by ordinary hands. Those words stayed with me, because that is how most important things survive, not through spectacle, but through care. We visited together a week later. Sophia stood beside me, her hands folded, her posture professional without being distant. She read every word. She noticed details others walked past. I recognized myself in that. I stood there longer than I expected, not because I missed it, but because I recognized it. It had finally come home, not to us, but to its place in the world, to a space where its story could be told without explanation, without defense. It no longer needed protection. It had become proof. The scholarship letters arrive twice a year now. They come from young people whose names rarely appear on plaques. People working maintenance, transport, sanitation, roles no one applauds, but everyone depends on. They write with careful gratitude, often apologizing for writing at all. Many of them mention their parents, their grandparents, hands worn down by labor that never made anyone rich, but made everything possible. They thank me. I write back when I can, not with speeches, not with lessons, just enough to say that I see them, that their work matters, that survival itself is a form of contribution. I tell them what I learned too late in life. That value does not announce itself. That dignity survives invisibility. That the quietest hands often carry the heaviest histories. Some of them write again. Some do not. That is fine. Daniel wrote once more. A longer letter this time. Fewer justifications. More questions. He said he was learning. I hope he is. Learning takes time. It also takes humility, and that is harder to measure. Sophia is thriving. Not in the way magazines define it. Not loudly. Not performatively. She walks lighter. She laughs without checking the room first. She chooses rest without guilt. She chose a life that fits her instead of one that impressed others. That matters more than success ever could. As for me, I remain what I have always been. A man who fixes what breaks. A father who listens. A keeper of stories that outlast objects. People still underestimate me sometimes. I still nod. I still smile. Because I know something they don't. Silence remembers everything. I was not born patient. People assume men like me arrive in the world already quiet, already resigned, already shaped to fit behind others without complaint. They imagine patience as something inherited, like eye color or bone structure, a trait passed down with blood. That is not how it works. Patience is not natural. It is acquired, and it is almost always paid for. I grew up in a border town that changed names 3 times before I turned 10. The maps did not keep up. Street signs lagged behind. One year, our school books were suddenly wrong without having changed a word. We woke up belonging somewhere else without moving an inch. Flags changed faster than schools did. Faster than habits. Faster than the way people spoke to each other in markets and kitchens. Authority arrived in uniforms, then left again, taking certainty with it. My father said borders were like bad weather. They pass, he told me, but you still have to live through them. He said this without bitterness. Just fact. He believed resentment wasted energy better spent surviving. I did not understand that then. I understand it now. My grandfather taught me how to hold tools before I learned how to write properly. He placed a chisel in my hand the way others might place a book, not ceremoniously, but with expectation. He did not explain much. He showed. Correction came quietly. Praise came rarely. He believed skill spoke for itself. With listens, he used to say, running his hand across a surface as if greeting an old friend. But only if you treat it with respect. He carved slowly, deliberately, never rushing a line, never forcing a curve. He would stop mid-motion if something felt wrong, step back, adjust his breath, and begin again. Watching him felt like watching time stretch. When I asked why he did not work faster, he smiled. Haste leaves scars. Those words followed me across oceans. When I came to this country, I was already a grown man. I had crossed borders before. I thought myself prepared. I was not. The language sat heavy in my mouth. Words I knew refused to come out correctly. Employers spoke loudly and slowly, as if volume could replace clarity. Some spoke kindly. Others spoke carefully. Many spoke as if I were temporary, even when I was standing directly in front of them. I took what work I could. Night shifts, cleaning crews, maintenance jobs no one wanted because they happened when others were sleeping. I learned buildings from the inside out, their leaks, their weak points, their hidden systems. I learned which doors stuck in winter and which pipes complained before breaking. I watched how people spoke when they thought power made them permanent. I learned that listening was safer than responding. That observation was stronger than confrontation. That knowledge, once earned, could never be taken. When Sophia was born, something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to realign everything else. I promised myself she would never feel small the way I had. I taught her languages not so she could impress, but so she could protect herself. Words are shields when used properly. I taught her how to notice details, not because paranoia is useful, but because awareness is. I taught her how to read a room, how to listen past tone and into intention, how to trust her instincts even when authority told her otherwise. Her mother used to say I worried too much. She was right. After she died, worry became structure, routine, purpose. Grief needs somewhere to go, or it eats its host. I hung the wooden panel where Sophia could see it every day, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded us who we were. Survivors, carriers, people who finished what others started. So when Daniel and his family laughed quietly at what they thought was nothing, it did not surprise me. It only confirmed something I already knew. People who measure worth only by shine never recognize the weight of what lasts. Sophia was never meant to grow up fast. Life simply decided she would. There was no announcement, no single moment where childhood ended and responsibility took its place. It happened the way weather changes, gradually at first, then all at once. One day, she was worrying about exams and friends and the small dramas that feel enormous when you are young. The next, she was learning how to sit still in hospital waiting rooms for hours without complaint. She learned the rhythm of those rooms quickly. The muted televisions, the vending machines that never worked properly, the way nurses avoided eye contact when answers were thin. She learned the smell of antiseptic, the way it clung to clothing long after you left. She learned which chairs were most comfortable for sleeping upright. She learned how to read a doctor's face before words arrived. I tried to shield her. I failed. Children always know more than adults think. They sense shifts. They hear what is not said. They understand loss long before they understand death. After the funeral, something changed in her. She stopped asking why things happened and started asking how they worked. How bodies healed. How pain could be measured. How damage could be reversed. I watched grief sharpen into direction. Money was always tight then. I took extra shifts, night work, emergency calls. I learned how to function on sleep taken in fragments. I learned how to stretch meals without making them feel small. How to repair shoes instead of replacing them. How to make silence feel safe instead of lonely. Sophia studied at the kitchen table beneath the wooden panel. Books open, notes spread wide, highlighters worn down to nothing. When she struggled, she would lean back in her chair and stare at the carving, tracing the grooves with her eyes as if they might rearrange themselves into answers. "What happened to the people in the carving?" she asked once. "They survived," I said, "because they helped each other." She nodded, not the nod of a child accepting comfort, but the nod of someone filing information away for later use. When her acceptance letter to medical school arrived, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. She sat down and cried the way people do when something finally releases pressure they did not realize they were carrying. I framed the letter, hung it beside the panel. That was the night I realized something important. She would outgrow every room I could build for her. And that was the point. Daniel entered her life during residency. He was charming in public, efficient with words, quick to compliment. He knew how to stand in light. In private, he was impatient, dismissive of pauses, uncomfortable with silence. I noticed the difference immediately. Sophia did not at first. Love bends perception. It smooths edges. It teaches people to excuse what they would never tolerate otherwise. He admired her intelligence, but only when it reflected well on him. He praised her compassion, but only when it was convenient. He liked her strength, but only when it did not challenge his own. I said nothing. Parents must sometimes let their children test their own illusions. When she married him, I worried. Not because he was cruel, but because he did not listen. People who do not listen eventually decide others are the problem. And when the betrayal came, it broke her not because of infidelity, but because of dismissal. Because he expected her to accept less, to understand, to accommodate, to shrink. That is something I never taught her. So when she came home, broken but intact, carrying more silence than belongings, I knew the story was not ending. It was correcting itself, the erosion before the ending. Divorce does not arrive all at once. It does not announce itself with shouting or slammed doors or the kind of dramatic finality people expect when they imagine endings. It arrives the way water does, patient, persistent, almost polite. It seeps in through cracks you did not know were structural. It settles into corners you never thought to inspect. By the time you notice it, the damage is already old. At first, it looks administrative. An envelope arrives in the mail, heavier than it needs to be. The paper is thick, official, designed to feel important. Sophia places it on the table and does not open it immediately. She makes tea instead. The kettle clicks off. Steam curls upward and disappears. Only then does she sit down and slide her finger beneath the seal. Inside, the language is careful and cold. Not cruel, just uninterested. Sentences are shaped to avoid responsibility. Words like hereby, pursuant regarding. Phrases that pretend neutrality while quietly dismantling shared life. They do not ask how she is doing. They do not remember holidays or laughter or the way Daniel used to fall asleep during movies. They do not mention love at all. They do not have to. Emails follow, written late at night or early in the morning. Times chosen not for convenience, but for distance. Each message reads like a memo pretending to be a conversation. Bullet points replace questions. Attachments replace explanation. When emotion appears, it is disguised as concern. I hope this finds you well. Sophia reads that line twice and exhales through her nose. Calendar dates change their meanings. What once marked beginnings now marks deadlines. Anniversaries flatten into filing dates. Birthdays turn into neutral scheduling conflicts. Even ordinary Tuesdays acquire weight because they're suddenly the day something must be submitted, something must be acknowledged, something must be finalized. Rooms respond before people do. The living room echoes differently, not because it is louder, but because sound has fewer places to land. The bedroom holds air too long. Drawers open without resistance now that half their contents are gone. Closets do not argue anymore. Not louder, just hollower. Sophia does not dramatize any of this. She approaches separation the way she approaches medicine, methodically. She creates folders. Physical ones color-coded. Digital ones backed up twice. She labels documents clearly, as if precision might contain the damage. Emotion is kept separate from obligation. Personal notes are written on different paper. Calls are scheduled, not spontaneous. She answers questions precisely. Yes. No. That will not be necessary. Please speak to my attorney. She refuses to raise her voice even when provoked. Even when Daniel's tone sharpens. Even when he frames concessions as generosity. Even when his patience thins and his language reveals more than he intends. I watch her from a distance. Not hovering. Not intervening. Just observing. I recognize what she is doing because I have done it myself. She is learning a new language. The language of separation. It is measured, restrained, stripped of romance. There is no room in it for hypotheticals or hope. No space for what might have been. Only what is and what must be addressed next. Some nights, though, the discipline loosens. The paperwork remains stacked neatly on the counter, untouched. The tea goes cold beside her. The house settles into its evening quiet, the kind that usually comforts us both. She sits at the kitchen table long after intention has left the room. I keep thinking I missed something, she says once. Not dramatically, not tearfully, just honestly. Some warning sign. She does not look at me when she says it. Her eyes stay on the wood grain of the table, following lines that have nothing to do with her question. I consider my answer carefully. You saw them, I say. You just believed love could change them. She nods. Slowly. That answer does not absolve Daniel. It does not excuse the pain, but it returns something important to her, agency. It reminds her that compassion is not blindness. That choosing hope is not the same as ignoring reality. Choice matters. The legal process ends the way it began. Quietly. There is no courtroom drama. No raised voices. No last-minute confessions that might reframe the past. Just signatures and transfers and the peculiar weight of finality, the kind that settles heavier than anger ever could. Daniel does not reach out again. Perhaps shame finally finds him. Perhaps distraction does. It no longer matters. What matters is that the paperwork stops arriving. The emails stop. The calendar begins, slowly, to empty. And space, real space, returns. Usefulness. When the paperwork stops arriving, there is a brief and unfamiliar silence. Not relief. Not yet. Just the absence of pressure, the kind that leaves a ringing in its place. Sophia does not celebrate it. She does not mark the moment. She simply notices that there is nothing left to answer. For the first time in months, her phone stays quiet for an entire afternoon. She returns to work part-time, not because she is ready. Readiness is a luxury she has never relied on. She returns because routine gives shape to days that would otherwise blur into one another. Because showing up somewhere that expects her presence creates boundaries grief cannot cross. The hospital smells the same. Antiseptic and old coffee. Something faintly metallic beneath it all. The sound are familiar too. The soft alarms, the hurried footsteps, the low murmur of voices trained to sound calm, even when they are not. Patients do not ask about her marriage. They ask about pain. They ask if this will hurt, if it is normal, if it will pass. Pain, when it belongs to someone else, is easier to treat. She moves through the ward with steady hands. Her voice is calm. Her instructions are clear. She does not rush. She listens fully, even when time is tight. Especially then. The children help. They always do. Children do not care about status or personal collapse. They care about whether you kneel to their level, whether you explain instead of dismiss, whether you stay when something hurts. At home, Sophia does not speak much about her days. She says things like, "It was busy," or "I'm tired." But I notice what she does not say. She no longer carries the brittle tension she brought home during the last months of her marriage. She does not replay conversations aloud. She does not rehearse defenses. She eats more. She sleeps more. She begins volunteering again at the free clinic in the evenings. The one Daniel once dismissed as inefficient. "It's disorganized," he had said. "You're wasting your skills." She never argued with him then. Now she goes twice a week. The clinic is loud and imperfect and perpetually short on resources. Paperwork piles up. Schedules slip. Patients wait longer than anyone would like. But the work matters in ways that cannot be summarized in metrics. She comes home tired, but lighter. "I feel useful again," she says one night, setting her bag down by the door. Not impressive. Useful. She says it like a discovery. That matters to her. Usefulness does not require performance. It does not demand admiration. It does not care who is watching. It simply asks whether something is better because you were there. That idea settles into her slowly. She begins to choose differently. Not dramatically, just consistently. What remains? As Sophia rebuilds her days, I return to mine. Not because I ever left them, but because routine feels different when it is no longer shared by necessity. When the house holds fewer negotiations. When mornings arrive without inherited tension. I walk the same routes I have taken for years, though I notice new things now. A cracked step that finally needs repair. A storefront that has changed hands again. The way light reaches further down the block in winter, as if even the sun is curious about what remains when excess is stripped away. Neighbors stop me. They always have. A loose railing. A sink that refuses to drain. A door that will not close properly unless you lift and pull at the same time. They trust my hands more than my explanations. I am fine with that. Fixing things is honest work. Objects do not lie about what they need. They respond to attention or they don't. Progress is visible. Completion is not theoretical. I read more. Slowly. Deliberately. I let books finish their sentences without interruption. I return to passages I underlined years ago and discover I no longer agree with them. That feels like growth. Or honesty. Sometimes they are the same thing. The scholarship fund takes shape the way most worthwhile things do. Quietly, without ceremony. It begins with a ledger, then a conversation, then another. I speak to administrators who are polite but curious. I answer their questions simply. I do not provide speeches. I do not explain myself beyond what is necessary. The first letters go out, then the replies come back. They are careful letters, grateful ones, many written late at night, after shifts that end when the city sleeps. Young people who keep buildings running, hospitals clean, transportation moving. Work no one applauds, but everyone relies on. They thank me. I thank them back. The hospital administrator insists on recognizing the contribution publicly. A small event, a microphone, applause. I ask him not to do it again. Value does not need an audience. The wooden panel's absence is noticeable, not painful, just present. The wall holds its outline like a memory the house has chosen not to forget. I do not rush to cover it. Some arts are not damage. They are record. The panel's story has completed a circle. It no longer needs our wall to survive. It has moved on to its next responsibility, to be seen without explanation, to exist without defense, to teach without speaking. That feels right. Setting things down. Time does not heal in the way people promise it will. That idea is comforting, which is why it survives. People like to believe that time behaves like a caretaker, quietly tidying rooms while you sleep, smoothing sharp edges, arranging grief into something manageable by morning. But time does not work that way. It has no intention, no mercy, no agenda beyond movement. It is not a race. The past does not dissolve simply because enough days have passed. Memory is not ink left in the sun. It darkens where it was pressed hardest. It remains legible long after you stop reading aloud. Time does not forgive on your behalf. Forgiveness, if it arrives at all, is a decision. Sometimes it comes slowly, negotiated over years. Sometimes it never arrives, and that is not failure. Some debts are not meant to be settled. Time does not intervene. It watches. It does not tidy up loose ends. Unfinished conversations stay unfinished. Questions without answers do not magically resolve themselves. There is no final accounting delivered quietly at the door of your life once enough seasons have passed. What time does, if you allow it, is create distance. And in that distance, perspective learns how to breathe. Not immediately, not dramatically. It happens the way lungs expand after being held too long underwater. Awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. Weeks pass, then months. Not evenly, not predictably. Some days arrive light, almost careless in their ease. Others arrive heavy, without warning. There is no schedule to it, no logic that can be charted. Grief is not obedient. Healing is not linear. Both take turns arriving unannounced. A song on a radio can still undo an entire morning. Not because it carries meaning, but because it once did. A name spoken casually in conversation can pull attention sideways, dragging memory with it like a shadow. A scent, soap, wood, rain on pavement, can reach too far back into places that never fully closed. But the difference now is this. The weight no longer anchors itself. It visits, then it leaves. Sophia does not mark milestones. She does not count the number of days since the divorce was finalized. She does not track progress in weeks or months. She does not announce anniversaries of endings. There is no ceremony for survival once it becomes ordinary. She does not reference Daniel unless necessary. And when his name does surface, rarely now, usually in the context of paperwork or shared acquaintances, it lands without sharp edges. The name no longer carries charge. It does not demand reaction. It exists as a fact, not a wound. That change happens quietly. No one congratulates her for it. One afternoon, she stands in the living room with her hands in her pockets. Not searching, not restless, just standing. The light from the window cuts across the floor at a familiar angle. Dust floats visibly in it undisturbed. The house holds its breath the way it does when nothing, not forgetting, not denying, not rewriting the past into something more palatable. Setting things down, anger, expectation, the need to be understood by those unwilling to listen. These are heavy things. People carry them for years without realizing how much energy they consume. They become habits, identities, proof of having been wronged. Letting go of them can feel like surrender, but it is not. It is conservation. There is room now for quieter things. Mornings that begin without urgency. No alarm, screaming obligation into consciousness. Just light finding its way through the curtains, gradual and unforced. Evenings that do not require explanation. No rehearsing of conversations. No defensive justifications. No scanning the room for tension before speaking. Conversations that wander without circling old ground. That do not need resolution to be satisfying. That can pause, drift, resume without anxiety. Laughter that does not check the room first. That is how I know Sophia is healing. She moves through her life with less armor. She still notices everything. That was never going to change. Awareness is not something you outgrow. But she no longer carries the responsibility of managing other people's discomfort. She does not soften truths in advance. She does not shrink herself to preserve peace that was never hers to keep. She chooses her work carefully, not what impresses, what aligns. She chooses her time deliberately, not what fills calendars, what restores attention. She treats her energy like something finite and valuable. Not the house feels different now, not fuller, not emptier, aligned. There is a coherence to it. The way furniture settles when no one is moving it to accommodate someone else's habits. The way silence stretches without tension. The way rooms no longer echo with what is missing, but hold space for what remains. The silence has texture. It holds memory without insisting on it. It does not intrude. It does not accuse. It allows recollection without demanding participation. The walls absorb what remains. In the evenings, I sit in my chair and read until my eyes tire. Not because I am escaping, but because reading has returned to what it was meant to be, an engagement, not a distraction. Sophia moves through the kitchen behind me. She does not narrate her presence. She does not apologize for noise. She exists comfortably, trusting that space will accommodate her. We exist in parallel, intersecting naturally, without collision, without negotiation. This is what survival looks like when it is no longer fighting. Not triumph, not victory, continuation. Later, when she leaves, I remain where I am. I do not follow her to the door. I do not worry. I trust the life she is building. I remain what I have always been. A man who fixes what breaks. A father who listens. A keeper of stories that outlast objects. People still underestimate me sometimes. I still nod. I still smile. Because I know something they don't. Silence remembers everything. And it remembers kindly when treated with respect. It does not arrive with invitations or titles or rooms full of people pretending to listen. It lives quietly in habits passed down, in hands that know how to repair instead of replace, in stories told softly so they are not lost. I have lived long enough to recognize it now. When I walk through my neighborhood, people wave. Some stop to ask advice about furnaces or leaky sinks. Others simply nod. That is enough. I do not need them to know where I have been or what I have carried. Sophia comes by most evenings now. Sometimes we cook. Sometimes we eat standing up. Sometimes we sit without speaking at all. She is building a life that fits her hands. She travels occasionally. She laughs more easily. She no longer explains herself to people who have already decided who she is. One night, she asked me something I did not expect. "Papa," she said, "do you ever regret not telling them who you were that night?" At the dinner, I thought about it for a long time. "No," I said, "because if I had spoken, they would have learned something about me. By staying quiet, I learned everything about them." She smiled. She understood. The world is full of people who mistake noise for strength, shine for value, confidence for character. They rush to judgment because patience feels like weakness to them. But patience remembers. It remembers who built things that lasted, who listened instead of dominating, who carried history forward without asking for credit. The wall in my living room is still lighter where the wooden panel once hung. I will repaint it someday, or maybe I won't. Some absences deserve to remain visible. I'm an old man now. I know that. My hands ache in the mornings. My pace is slowed, but I have learned something important. The measure of a life is not what you display. It is what you preserve, what you pass on, what you protect when no one is watching. People still underestimate me sometimes. I let them, because the quietest stories are the ones that survive the longest.